So, good afternoon, everyone. I know there's still some people coming in, but we're going to start. We're delighted to have Rik Ferguson here with us this afternoon. And thank you to HP for sponsoring this talk. And Rik is a researcher, storyteller, and futurist. And he's involved with Forescout. He's the Vice President of Security Intelligence. He's a founding special advisor to Europol's European Cyber Crime Centre. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Rik to the stage.
Thank you very much. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for sticking around. I know some of you have already run away to get trains, and that's their loss. So well done for sticking around. Before I start, I guess I'll just give you a little bit of background about me, not too much, because this is more interesting than this. But I just want you to know where I come from and how I ended up here. Because I think that kind of story is important for context. So I started my career in technology, in IT, back in '94, and I was a help desk. I was on tier 1 help desk, literally picking up the phone, Rik speaking, how can I help you, and fixing broken stuff. And I spent a good 12 years fixing broken stuff, and actually it was a really great baptism of fire. When the only thing that you deal with every day is stuff that doesn't work. I'm sure some of you in the audience are familiar with this, intimately familiar with this. And it's your job to find out why it's not working and what you have to do to get it working again. You learn so much more than when you're in a role from the outside looking in and you, like, for example, selling things, and you sell the dream and you sell the fact that everything works. So back in '94, that meant things like TCP/IP was a choice, not a necessity. We were running networks with IPX, SPX on them. We were running Token Ring. We were running TCP/IP. Windows 3.11 was the desktop operating system when I started. It was that long ago. And my career progressed through the years to a point where I got to be able to apply my experience on the research side of things now. So my research focuses on really two important areas. What does the threat landscape look like today? What are threat actors doing? What are they using and how are they doing it? And by the same token, how is technology changing? How is what you guys are doing changing? It's really interesting listening to things like business continuity and disaster recovery plans, incident response, and where will the future opportunities for criminals be as a result of those changes in all of those different technologies? So that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So the first part of the presentation is really talking about now, what's going on now. So we'll dive straight into that. What are threat actors doing? Ransomware, as I'm sure many of you, again, intimately know, unfortunately. You don't have to put your hands up, but I know that there'll be people in this room who've been directly affected. Continues to evolve and continues to be incredibly prevalent. In fact, increasing year on year, every year, in terms of frequency of events. The story of ransomware is a long and interesting one. It goes all the way back to the 5.25-inch floppy disk, if any of you remember those. The first ever ransomware delivered was sent through the post on a 5.25-inch floppy. And actually, it's an interesting story. I'll tell you the story anyway, because we have time. It was sent on this 5.25-inch floppy. It became known as the AIDS Trojan, as in the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS Trojan, because it was sent to hospitals and healthcare facilities throughout the world. And the story is, the guy behind it was a medical doctor. So not your typical cyber criminal, the typical hoodie that all the journalists will use as their banner image. And apparently he'd been turned down for a job at the World Health Organization, was feeling a bit bitter, and decided to do something about it. So he made this first ever ransomware. His name was Dr. Joseph L. Popp, P-O-P-P, you can look him up. What it did was it didn't encrypt anything. Crypto ransomware came much, much later. But you would run it on your system. It would be a fully functional questionnaire designed to assess your risk of being exposed to HIV, hence the name the AIDS Trojan. And it worked, up to a point. One day you would come into work and you would turn on your computer, and instead of your usual green screen, you would see a red screen, and it would say you're running unlicensed software, you haven't paid the license fee for this software, and you have to send cash or a postal order or a check to a PO box in Colombia. That's the first ransomware. It wasn't Bitcoin back then. It didn't actually encrypt anything, it just changed file extensions. But back then, that would have felt like voodoo magic to most people, most users anyway, like nothing was accessible. The really funny thing about it is the story of how he was arrested. So Dr. Pop was traveling back to the US, where he was from, through Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. And he was reported to security in the airport for acting funny. As the story goes, he had scrawled on his suitcase, "Dr. Pop has been poisoned." And he was standing at the baggage carousel waiting to reclaim luggage, and this "Dr. Pop has been poisoned" was written on the suitcase. So he was taken into custody. They opened his luggage, and they found a whole load of these exact 5¼ inch floppies in his luggage and began to put the clues together, and he was arrested. He ended up finishing his days. He died relatively recently, running a butterfly sanctuary in upstate New York. So that's like the beginning and end of the first ever ransomware. It continues to evolve. And 2023 has been no exception. In fact, most recently, we've seen the resurgence of a ransomware threat actor that dates back to 2016 called Kerber, targeting vulnerabilities in Atlassian that were very recently made public. So this threat actor, very effective threat actor from 2016, is now back in the game using those vulnerabilities. Some of the bigger names are the ones that you can see on the screens either side of me. Certainly Lockbit continues to be the most prevalent, well known for attacking Accenture in 2021. In 2022, Lockbit 3.0 was released because they do all the same things as regular software vendors, right? They have versioning and they have tech support and they even have bug bounties. So for Lockbit 3.0, they had a bug bounty out on the encryption-decryption module. So they put it out there. Anyone who could find vulnerabilities in the encryption-decryption part of the software, they would pay bug bounty to. The scary thing about Lockbit is that the builder for version 3 leaked online in September 22, which means that you no longer have to become a registered affiliate of Lockbit to use Lockbit 3.0 because the builder is out there and anybody can use it to build their own versions of Lockbit. However, they remain extremely prevalent, targeting all kinds of individuals. Another one that's very prevalent right now is called AlphaV. You may have come across AlphaV. AlphaV is a ransomware as a service provider. So again, they learn lessons from regular commercial business. They know that an affiliate model works very well for them. They can be one step removed from the actual crime of extortion and encryption and intrusion. They just license out the ransomware to an affiliate who does all of that stuff, and then they keep a percentage of the profits, somewhere between 10 and 30%, depending on the affiliate, depending on the ransom, depending on the victim. AlphaV, actually, if you go to any presentations about threats and threat landscape, one of the things that will always come up is the Colonial Pipeline hack because it was big news and everybody likes to refer to it. AlphaV are actually the same people that did that. So the people that did Colonial Pipeline that got all of the US Gov attention on them and subsequently tried very rapidly to disappear was the DarkSide ransomware group, right? They rebranded as, because they're very inventive and imaginative, they stopped being DarkSide, they disappeared, then they came back as Dark Matter, because nobody will know. And very quickly, Dark Matter went away and became Black Cat. Too many blacks and darks. DarkSide, Dark Matter, Black Cat, AlphaV. All the same threat actor. But they've evolved from being a threat actor using their own ransomware to commit their own crimes and do their own extortion into AlphaV, which is another ransomware as a service threat actor. By the same token, you probably all heard of Conti. Conti got it very visible. US law enforcement, global law enforcement was they were issuing warrants for identified people and very hot on the trail of other people active within the Conti organization. They also self-immolated at a certain point and just completely tried to disappear and go underground. But of course, they never do. They just rebrand, right? If we're not arresting these people, which unfortunately we're not very often, then they go away and resurface as another group. So the people within the Conti group, their last great act of ransomware was to ransom the entire nation of Costa Rica. They basically held the whole government to ransom and encrypted all the systems they could reach that belonged to the government of Costa Rica. Turns out that was kind of a smokescreen to make it look like they were still active while they were busy individually disappearing and getting ready to resurface. Because what's happened in the past, people like DarkSide disappear, wait a certain amount of time, and reappear. And it's quite easy to kind of link those events. So what Conti did was this very visible Costa Rica thing, and they were reappearing at the time that all of the Costa Rica thing was still happening as other threat actors. So it didn't look like they'd gone away and come back. And they became things like Karakurt, Blackbuster, Royal, many other threat actors. What's been really interesting to watch in the ransomware landscape is that some of the methodology is starting to change. Now, I'm not saying encryption is going away forever or has gone away completely, but the actual encryption attacks are declining. And there's a good reason for that. The encryption part of ransomware is a huge overhead for a threat actor. Right? You have to write and maintain the encryption-decryption module. You have to write it successfully enough that your victims and the companies that work with them are not going to be able to crack or reverse that encryption using methods other than your decryption module. So it has to be good and it has to be solid. And it has to be reliable because, perversely, ransomware is a business that is built on trust at the end of the day. Because if you get hit by ransomware and then you go and read about that threat actor and what you read is you never get your data back anyway, well, then why are you going to pay the ransom? So it thrives on the trust of that it works. You need to know as a victim that if you're going to pay the ransom, you are going to get your stuff back. Otherwise, why would you bother? So they also have the huge overhead of all of the key maintenance that if any of you deal with legit encryption, I'm sure you're familiar with, right? Key management, key aging, key distribution, making sure that the right keys go to the right victims and that you remember who belongs to what. So it's actually quite a big process overhead for the poor threat actor. And they've also discovered that, of course, your get-out-of-jail-free card in the event of a ransomware attack is effective backup and restore. If you have a good backup regime and it manages to remain unaffected by the attack, that's your go-to, right? It's just restore from backup and cross your fingers and then try and find how they got in the first place. Which, by the way, is extremely important because the FBI just issued a warning a couple of months ago about what they're calling now dual ransomware attacks, where you get hit and then within 30 days you get hit again with a different strain of ransomware. So watch out for those. That's why you need to find and close that patient zero as soon as possible. So they're moving away from encryption as the sole or primary means of extortion and doing data exfiltration and publishing. So there used to be what we call single, double, triple, even quadruple extortion on ransomware attacks. And the first and primary was encryption, denial of access to your data. That was how you get extorted. Then they layered on top publishing the stolen data after a certain period if you're not going to pay the ransom as another lever to get you to pay. So they've discovered that actually that is just as effective as encrypting your data, or possibly more effective as encrypting your data in the first place, because backup is not going to save you. You've got nothing to back up. Your data is stolen and will be published. Backup doesn't help. In fact, you don't need to recover. Your data was never encrypted in the first place. But it's the damage from publication that is perhaps even worse than the damage from denial of access to systems and data. One example, ALV, that I was talking about before, they targeted a healthcare organization in the US this year. They specifically went after the oncology imaging servers because they knew what they would find there, and then some of the data that they were publishing to get the healthcare facility to pay the ransom was naked photographs of breast cancer patients. They knew what they would find on these servers, and they would publish that data. They go after educational institutions, another one again in the US, stole all of the data that they could find there, which included the entire notes and transcriptions of things like sexual abuse cases within sexual abuse investigations within the healthcare, within the educational institution. So they know which data is most sensitive. They know which day of the week is the best. They know the points of leverage. CLOP resurfaced hugely this year because of the huge vulnerabilities in Go Anywhere and Move It file transfer software. CLOP had gone relatively quiet. They've been around for a very long time, very effective, very experienced, and then they saw these 0 days and they went crazy on these 0 days. They've affected about 600 organizations, and the best guess is about 40 million individuals by using these 0 days for CLOP ransomware attacks this year. So ransomware is still extremely big business and is only growing. This year is worse than last year, which was worse than the year before, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing we're seeing a rise in and interest in is what's being called identity-based attacks. Now, identity-based attacks encompass a whole range of different things, many of which you'll be very, very familiar with. Of course, phishing is an identity-based attack. It goes after credentials, phishing, vishing, smishing, and all the other different ishings to do with stealing credentials. Credential stuffing and password spraying, so having a huge database of known credentials and just spraying them everywhere and seeing if any of them work. Or taking one victim and throwing your whole database of credentials at this one victim to see if you can get in. All of these are identity-based attacks. But something which, or two things which are gaining in prevalence. The first one is a very simple, very effective one, which is paying insiders. Looking for, and either social engineering or just looking for willing insiders who will offer access to an organization. Because access is what's important. Just access, nothing more at this point. And the other one that's working is also MFA fatigue, multi-factor authentication fatigue. So of course, you've all rolled out your MFA solutions. My employer has one as well. Attackers know this, and they have to work out ways to overcome this. So MFA fatigue has become the thing. And what I mean by MFA fatigue is they have your credentials, right, through phishing or whatever other mechanism. They have your username, they have your password. But they don't have your other factor, your mobile device, for example. So they will attempt a login with the correct credentials, and you'll get a pop-up on your phone that says, are you trying to log in, yes or no? That's your other factor, right? No. And then they'll script it, and then they'll just run it loads of times, and you'll be getting pop-up, pop-up, is it you, is it you, is it you, is it you, is it you? You can't get anything else done, and it's really frustrating, and they're relying on the fact that eventually you'll just go, yes, it was me. And then they're in. But of course, you don't always do that. So if that doesn't work, they'll stop, then they'll call you and use some social engineering to achieve the same end. Hi, is that Rick? Yeah, I can see you're having some problems with login. You're getting a lot of pop-ups on your mobile device. Yeah, I am, and it's really annoying. Okay, we're going to send you one more. If you could just click yes on that one, it'll go away. Great. And of course it goes away, because they're in now. So that's MFA fatigue, social engineering really at its finest. When I said access is the thing, and this is why identity-based attacks are growing in prevalence and popularity, is that access is a commodity now. There's a whole underground ecosystem business case for initial access brokers or initial access vendors. That's all they do. They establish a beachhead in your organization and do nothing else. You don't know they're there because they don't do anything. And then they sell that access to someone who will do something with it, usually ransomware threat actors or people who are going to steal the data. But they are access brokers or access vendors. That's their entire business model. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of, again related, is supply chain attacks, again facilitated through access vendors or as a result of trying to gain further access in order to be able to sell it. The two biggest ones this year is 3CX and Circle CI. 3CX was very interesting. It's the first example of what has become known as a double supply chain attack. So supply chain attack obviously is when I want to go after you, but instead of targeting you, I go after someone that you're a customer of to get to you. I love you. It's not you, okay? But you know what I mean, right? You're a bigger organization with more money and better security, so I'm not going to go after you straight away. I'm going to go after someone whose software you use or whose services you use, and hope that that access will get me into you. It's a very, very old model, works very well. 3CX was targeted because the threat actor compromised another much smaller software company called Xtrader, a share trading platform that they knew was used within 3CX. They managed to inject malware into the Xtrader update system, which then was brought into 3CX. They were then able to compromise 3CX through the malware that had been installed through the supply chain in order to go after 3CX's customers, which is who they were after in the first place. 3CX is a communication platform, so they were able to access meeting recordings, PII, financial data, everything, the huge, lovely treasure trove of data for them to later to resell. Circle CI The attacker stole session tokens from a compromised laptop. So they used malware to compromise a laptop, stole session tokens from that laptop, which allowed them further access to Circle CI, which is a development platform, allowed them further access to Circle CI to steal their customers' data, including their software builds and keys, tokens, environment variables, all the kinds of things that you'll find in a development platform that were extremely useful for them, again, for downstream attacks. And then some of the bigger names last year, 2022, I'm sure you came across the breach of Okta by the Lapsus threat actor, which included some school kids. That's the level of sophistication. LastPass compromised more than once, and yet LastPass is the software that you entrust all of your passwords to. So you can see the value of that as a supply chain attack. Com100, communications provider, compromise of GitHub, which allowed access to a bunch of different GitHub users' projects, corporate projects within GitHub. So these are some really high-profile supply chain data breach type attacks. Cloud is also a thing. I've heard some mention today of cloud in the context of security and cloud in the context of resilience. I remember the birth of cloud really as an enterprise platform. Back, pre-enterprise cloud, the only people that used it were people like us who were using it for research because virtualization really wasn't good enough to run operational systems on, and cloud was just an idea. But it is now mature enough, I guess, in the last maybe not quite 20 years, but certainly 15 years to be, as you know, Google Cloud, AWS, Microsoft Azure, IBM, Rackspace, all of these different players and providers in the cloud space. It has become embedded everywhere. What's interesting is that breaches of cloud tend to be self-inflicted still. It tends to be hugely reliant on misconfiguration by the user than on exploitation of vulnerabilities by a threat actor. And far and away, the misconfiguration is about making data public that you didn't mean to make public. It's things like S3 buckets. And I appreciate that S3 buckets used to be by default, everybody could read what was in there, but that's not the case anymore. So for you to do it now, it means it's self-inflicted. You did that to yourself to make your life easier, and it's still far too prevalent. And the big one of 2023 was Microsoft themselves coming clean to a 38 terabyte data loss through misconfigured, effectively buckets. They don't call them buckets, but misconfigured buckets where everything in it was public read, including full backups of 2 laptops, and including, I forget how many thousands of Teams chats and all of the content within the Teams chat. But 38 terabytes of data, as I'm sure you appreciate, is a very, very large amount. And again, it was self-inflicted. So cloud is definitely an area that you need to consider when you're doing your threat modeling. It's definitely an area that will impact you, but make sure that your threat modeling includes that notion of self-inflicted wounds. It's not only about what other people will do to you, it's about what you do to yourself. Don't leave that factor out in your planning. 0 days is always something that we speak about in cybersecurity. It's something that increases almost year on year. Certainly the number of raw vulnerabilities, all vulnerabilities published year on year, always increases. That's not a surprise and not necessarily a negative thing. It means that bug bounty programs are working, for example. It means that software vendors have better procedures for testing and for finding bugs, either in production or in QA, whatever it might be. So that's good. 0 day is a more up and down number. The biggest year ever for 0 days so far was 2021. And in 2021, we saw 87 0 days published. That means a vulnerability which is made public, for which there is no fix at the time when the vulnerability is made public, that is being actively exploited in the wild. So the most dangerous kind of vulnerability, depending on its criticality, of course, but arguably the most dangerous kind of vulnerability. People are exploiting it, and you don't have a fix for it. But you need to know about it so you can have some mitigation for it. So 87 in 2021, that was a banner year, the most we've ever had. The bad news is we haven't reached the end of this year yet, and the number on my slide is 82, but I checked just before I came up, and it's 83 now. So it continues to tick, and we still have a couple of months left. I firmly believe that we'll surpass the worst ever year for 0 days this year, so we'll go over 87 this year. The biggest one, of course, I briefly mentioned earlier on, were the vulnerabilities in Move It and Go Anywhere, which were used by the Clop ransomware gang. That's how powerful 0 days can be when they are integrated and weaponized effectively by an experienced threat actor like Clop. 600 different organizations affected by Clop ransomware, and 40 million people affected by the theft and publication of data in those ransomware attacks. So vulnerabilities are a big deal. If you want to know how to prioritize vulnerabilities, there are a few, there's a lot of theoretical methodology you can apply. There are a couple of really good tools. One of them that I'll call out is CISA's Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Database, KEV. So if you look for CISA's KEV, if it's in the Known Exploited Vulnerability Database, that means that threat actors out there are targeting that vulnerability right now. So if you find that vulnerability in your environment, if you have the required visibility to know that you have it within your environment, that should be at the top of your list for getting remediated or mitigated, because it's under active exploitation right now. The other thing is an effective risk-based approach to vulnerability management. Within your Security Operations Center team, you've got really two sides to it, right? You've got the reactive side, which is your SOC, your incident response team, incoming threat, damage mitigation, find patient zero, clean up the mess. But you've also got, hopefully, a proactive element to your security and to your SOC team, which is your VRM team, your Vulnerability Remediation and Management team. It is absolutely unreasonable to expect any organization to patch everything always, all the time. Right? That's never going to happen. There are too many vulnerabilities, there are too many systems, there are too many critical systems. Every patch needs a backup plan in case it goes wrong, and they sometimes do go wrong, affecting upstream or downstream systems. So there's a huge overhead to that. You need to be able to prioritize effectively those slightly less than red hot known exploited ones. And that's about identifying the assets that you have, identifying the criticality of those assets to your organization. If this system goes down, it's life and death, literally. Maybe it's a hospital, right? If this systems go down, we can't run payroll. If these systems go down, actually, we could probably get by for a week without them, and people might complain a bit, but we're still going to do business. So find the criticality of the asset that's affected, and work out where the vulnerabilities are present within your environment, work out the effectiveness of the compensating controls that you have in place, and that gives you much more of a manageable cadence for prioritizing patch management within the organization. But risk criticality, along with exploitability of the vulnerability itself, are really key factors in achieving that. The other thing that's been really big over the past almost 2 years now, of course, has been the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing war. And the war itself, obviously, has been ongoing since 2014. So this isn't just since the invasion. But what we've seen a lot since the invasion, definitely we've seen a lot of evolution and uptick in cyber attacks, including disinformation, of course, including attacks on operational technology. We've seen the rise of new attack groups and some new or modified attack methodology. One of the ones that we saw in the first year of the war was a group called Cyber Partisans in Belarus, who took a run-of-the-mill ransomware executable and used it to encrypt the servers belonging to the Belarusian railway network, so that the Russians were unable to use the tracking and signaling in Belarus to move things to the front. So we were seeing cyber attacks supporting defensive Ukraine, but also supporting the invasion. I'm sure you all know that on the day that the invasion was launched, there was also an attack against the ground systems for KA-SAT satellite comms that obviously took out a lot of internet connectivity within Ukraine, but also had collateral damage. For example, a wind farm in Germany was also taken offline by this very same attack. So attacks against operational technology. We've seen a lot of phishing, trying to get credentials to get into systems. We've seen a lot of wiper malware deployed, which is like ransomware, but it doesn't encrypt, it just destroys, and there's no ransom, just to render a system completely inoperable. And we've seen the rise of groups, or the reorientation of hacktivist groups on both sides of that conflict, supporting Ukraine and supporting Russia on both sides. In fact, Conti, who I spoke about on the ransomware side, they came out very firmly in support of Russia at the beginning of the invasion, And that was one of the primary factors that led to them disappearing, because it became impossible to pay any ransom to Conti, because they became a sanctioned entity because they were supporting the Russian war effort. So any organization that wanted to pay a ransom to Conti had to also balance up the fact that they were sanctions busting by doing that, and what was the risk of that. And actually that was far higher than the risk of the ransom itself. So they kind of put themselves out of business by supporting Russia. But one thing to me that's really critical about what's happened during the conflict in Ukraine is the ongoing consequences. So of course, the kinds of attacks, hacktivist attacks that we've seen, standard things like web defacement. This one here is a ticket portal for cinemas this was in Moscow itself, but anywhere in Russia. And you can see that the thumbnail for every movie has been changed to Russia is a terrorist state, Putin is a war criminal, Putin with his clowny makeup on there. And that was like standard web defacement stuff, which is tried and tested old tactics. But they're also recruiting organizations for attacks on operational technology, recruiting individuals into hacktivist groups for attacks on operational technology. You can see the kinds of projects that they're being recruited for there, which means that we now live in a world where the outcome of fingers on a keyboard at one end is this at the other end. So cyber attacks have real kinetic consequences, particularly when we talk about attacks that are targeting operational technology. So fingers on a keyboard to break into a facility. This one was a military vehicle repair. No, this one, sorry, was a military vehicle repair facility in Russia that was targeted. Systems were modified. It resulted in explosion and fire at the plant, so they couldn't fix the military vehicles anymore. This one was an electricity substation, again, that was targeted from a distance. Equipment was modified. Fire broke out, explosion broke out. So the real-world consequences of cyber attacks now can be actually kinetic, damaging, harmful attacks. When the war ends and when Ukraine emerges victorious and we welcome it into the European Union and everyone's happy, these skills and these threat actors aren't necessarily going to go away. This particular box is now open. These skills are out there. More people have these skills and the ability and the experience of having used them in the past. So this is something that definitely needs to figure into threat modeling exercises for you in the future. And then the final thing, which I'm going to use as a springboard really to talk about the future, when deepfakes became a thing, which was a few years ago now, right? When we saw the Tom Cruise deepfakes and the Mark Zuckerberg deepfakes, and it was all kind of funny, we were talking about, oh yeah, there's definitely the possibility that deepfakes will become part of our threat portfolio that we have to consider. You know, instead of business email compromise using an email, what about if it's a FaceTime call and you really believe that you're talking to the CEO who's asking you as a director of finance to pay this extremely important bill of 50 million euros by the end of the week, otherwise there'll be terrible consequences, because deepfake will allow you to do face synthesis, voice synthesis, and all of those things. It was vaguely theoretical at the time. It definitely isn't now. So deepfake moves on to, certainly with the rise of the LLM, deep chat, but then when you begin to put all of these technologies together, it becomes very difficult for us to separate fact from fiction, reality from fantasy. And I firmly believe that that will be our greatest challenge over the next decade, is how do we tell these two things apart in our daily life, of course, but also in cybersecurity and in a threat scenario. How do we make the distinction between what is real and what somebody wants you to believe? Because it will definitely be a contributory factor to cyber attacks. You may think to yourself, well, why AI? Why now? Why has it suddenly exploded? What the hell is going on here? Well, AI itself relies on three things for the power that it has today. It relies on data, it relies on algorithms, and it relies on computing power. Those are kind of the three foundational things for AI to be effective. We have obviously more data in greater abundance and an ever-growing quantity than we've ever had before. Fantastic for training an AI, any kind of AI. We have, of course, been working on AI and associated algorithms since the 1950s. So we're at a point when these algorithms are becoming extremely effective. And processing power now is, well, it's a credit card gets you all the processing power you want with the rise of cloud infrastructure, right? That's why shares in NVIDIA are going through the roof, because GPUs are incredibly useful for providing raw processing power to do these things. So we've definitely seen an explosion in innovation and adoption of AI, LLMs being the ChatGPTs of the world being the flavor of the month right now, but certainly not the only thing. And it's becoming mainstream. But the reason why it becomes difficult to tell fact from fiction is that not only is it becoming mainstream, it's becoming incredibly credible. Can you say that? I think so. It's becoming incredibly credible. These pictures were circulating, and for a while, some of them particularly, this one in particular, people believe were real. The Pope in a puffer. I mean, it even has a great name. But people believe that these were entirely real. Of course, they were absolutely fake. After Donald Trump's arrest, we saw Bojo's arrest, and related to the war in Ukraine, Prigozhin with his gang of Muppets. I mean, these were all like Mid-Journey type tool stuff, right? So it's not just ChatGPT, it's not just LLMs, it's all of the associated AI technology. One other thing, though, and the title of the slide is Sorry, Not Sorry. So sorry, not sorry, because I don't know about you, for me, this is kind of E. One thing that you can always look at, well, always. One thing that you should look for with AI-generated images is hands. The latest version of Mid-Journey has done quite a good job of being better at doing hands, but the reason for it is, think of the learning data, and put the clicker in my back pocket, hopefully nothing's going to happen. Think of the learning data the algorithm has when it comes to hands, right? They could be like this, but very rarely are they like this. They're like this, like this, like this, like this, like this. They're shaking hands. There are all kinds of different configurations. So AI has a really hard time of understanding what a hand looks like, which is why you end up with this kind of thing. Armed with that knowledge, actually, if we go back, the hands are a bit weird. But you don't notice until you look for it. I don't think we can see it, the Pope's hand. The Pope's hand is kind of okay, but not the one holding whatever he's holding. It's like a pepper grinder or in a shopping bag. I don't even know. And the hands here are very odd. So certainly that's one of the currently things you can look for that provide you a clue. But of course, this stuff is improving and iterating year on year. The truth is, we already live in a time when someone who doesn't exist is more successful than you are, which is a little bit soul-destroying. This particular lady is one of the 25 most influential people on the internet. She's worked with Chanel, Prada, Esquire. She's had earnings in the double digits of millions, and she's never existed. But still, I mean, you can console yourself with the great Dr. Seuss fact, that today you are you. That is truer than true. There is no one alive who is youer than you. Or is there? Picture this. You receive a phone call on your own personal mobile device from your own daughter. And it's your daughter's voice on the phone. And she says, "Mommy, Daddy, whoever, I've made a terrible mistake, I'm in real trouble." And then the phone is taken out of her hand, and you hear the voice of her kidnapper telling you that they have your daughter and giving you instructions of where you have to take the cash. This is real. I'm not making this up just for fun. This is a growing cybercriminal trend. In this particular instance, this girl was the alleged victim. Her father received a phone call, and he was phoning around friends and family and acquaintances and businesses and trying to get the money together that the kidnapper had said he needed if he ever wanted to see his daughter again and take it to the car park he was supposed to take it to. It just so happened that during the time that he was doing this, his daughter called his wife. "Hey, Mom, how you doing? I'm just going with some friends to the cinema," or whatever, right? And she's like, "Hold on, you're supposed to be kidnapped." What? Of course she hadn't ever been kidnapped. The attacker had cloned her voice and used it to fake the phone call, which is why there was only the very short sentence, "I've made a terrible mistake, I'm in real trouble," then grabbing the phone and start to talk. But it puts you in that fight or flight mode as a victim immediately. I must do the right thing, and there's terrible urgency about this thing that I have to do. So we're already seeing that. And disinformation is another area that is being massively, widely, actively exploited by threat actors in the same way, and by state actors. Again, hugely within the war in Ukraine. This particular example was tweeted by the Russian embassy in the UK and various other outlets and organizations. And the story was, and actually, by the way, disinformation in Russia dates all the way back to Stalin. He started the Disinformation Bureau. I forget what it was called, but he started an official office for propaganda and disinformation way back at the outset of his rule of Russia. And it's been a standard tool for controlling the belief of the local population since then within Russia. This is what happened here. You can probably read, if you can't read the text, what they're alleging here is that Ukrainian military stopped a lady allegedly for violating traffic rules, and after they heard her speaking Russian and finding out that she was a Muslim, they got her out of the car, they pointed weapons at her and the children and treated her incredibly, terribly badly, called her a pig, and fired several shots, scaring the children, scaring the baby, all this kind of stuff. Analysis of the footage revealed that actually it took place on the far side of Donetsk, way behind Russian lines, and that the whole thing was a disinfo op where they just used Ukrainian uniforms and staged and filmed the whole thing for the purposes of creating disinformation to discredit Ukrainian forces and their treatment of Russian speakers and religious minorities. Standard tools and tactics. So there's been some great research into disinformation and how it works, and the Center for Security and Emerging Technology built this wonderful visualization called the Rich Data Pyramid of how disinformation works, how you put it together, how you weaponize it and actualize it into actual outcomes. So it starts with reconnaissance, finding out about your victim, finding out who your victim population is, who they interact with, what their relationships look like, what the fissures and points of leverage are within that group, within that society, within that nation. Where's the place where you want to smash your crowbar so that when you pull it, you get the greatest effect for fracturing society, creating polemic, setting person against person. That's the reconnaissance part of disinfo. And it can take a long time. Then you have to build your infrastructure. How are you going to disseminate this? And you have to create your content. Make the videos, make the images, make the memes, make the text. And I challenge you, go back through your Facebook or your Twitter, or I think you'll find without exception that you'll find something that you might have reposted because you thought it was funny at some point in the past, that when you reconsider it now, with the question in your head, who wanted me to repost this? What was the motivation? You'll view it in a completely different light. I know there's things in my Facebook timeline that I went back and went, but where did that come from and why? Like, what was the point behind that image? And then you deploy it, so people see it. You amplify it using the infrastructure that you've built, but also you rely on organic, very effective organic amplification. And for that purpose, you also have your troll patrol, which are real people who engage with people who are amplifying or denying your content, because either way, you're amplifying it. Even if you're amplifying it to deny it, you're still amplifying it. And Troll Patrol will engage, and then it's actualized into real results. So that's how it works today. Consider the effects if you apply AI to this pyramid. Like, what happens with that pyramid, the disinformation pyramid, when you can apply AI, LLMs, the fact that you can create your own infrastructure. So things like reconnaissance, amplification, and trolling are all fully automated. Sentiment analysis, for example. Reconnaissance relies on ingesting a huge quantity of data and making conclusions based on that data, finding those fissures in society, grouping populations into various groups, deciding on a strategy. How you have your network to amplify it, well, suddenly it's very easy to create online personas with history dating back a very long time and a whole load of fully legitimate-looking content, not just bot-related content. They have a backstory and they look entirely believable. And you can automate all of your amplification through this completely machine-run infrastructure. And the same with trolling as well. Troll Patrol doesn't have to be humans anymore. And of course, when we look at content creation, think back to those images of Trump, of the Pope, of Boris, of Prigozhin. All of that can be automated, highly credible, not just images, but video, speech, text, all of that content generated in super quick time by AI, reacting to events as they unfold and shaping the narrative of events as they unfold. All in the name of changing the way you think and what you believe, which changes the world and society as a consequence. That's the aim. This is serious business. It's not just a pope in a puffer. It's really serious business. And if you think it's not, we already live in this world. This was a story in Belgium where a guy ended up committing suicide after he was effectively advised to do so by an AI. His concern was global warming, and one of the things that he suggested was that, well, maybe if I wasn't around contributing to it, maybe that would help, and the chap was like, yeah, that would help. And the outcome was, the ultimate outcome for any human is that he ended his existence. So we're already in a world where AI has these kinds of outcomes. So what's the future of misinformation and disinformation? Well, for me, it's really scary. And I was looking for a way to illustrate it. And while I was looking around, I found this video, and it couldn't have been more effective or more chilling if they tried, and it's not even really about what I'm talking about. But the future of misinformation looks something like this.
I could be one of many.
주인공이 덕대 나를.
Je pourrais être architecte.
Ou guide.
Quizá un artista. You create the narrative. I
am metahuman.
That one line was like, oh, this is incredibly chilling. You create the narrative. Whatever story you want to tell, we're here as an army to tell that story convincingly for you. None of these people are real. None of these people exist. This is just Unreal Engine. This is the thing that games are, this is the engine that's used at the heart of games to create NPCs or to create your character within the video game. And this is already 2 years old. And some of these people just look incredibly convincing. It's a couple of years old, and it's just an incredibly chilling thought that this kind of technology, in combination with the power of AI and the volume of data that's out there to create your face, your voice, your thoughts, can shape and direct the future of society if we don't actively prepare for that eventuality now. So with that in mind, how do we prepare for that? It's highly reliant for me, preparing for disinfo, and this is on an organizational scale as well. This isn't just what do we do about the Russian narrative about the war in Ukraine. It's a societal thing as well. I come from the land of Brexit. That was never supposed to happen. There were definitely information space shaping operations that happened prior to that vote. And it had far-reaching real-world consequences as a result. So pre-bunking has become a really powerful tool, not debunking, not waiting for something to be published and then actually amplifying it with the fact that you're debunking it, but actively preparing people for the kinds of misinformation that they may well see, so that forewarned is forearmed. You can do that within your organization as well. It's not just a societal problem. And if you're psychologically prepositioning the people within your organization, you can do the groundwork necessary to let them know the actions that they should take when they encounter something which may well not be true, not be believable. If you encounter things like this that make you feel like this, here are the resources for you, here are the places where you can go, and obviously you'll need to prepare yourselves and your responses to that so that people can get real and helpful information when they come across this kind of thing. But also, organizations like HEAnet are great because it allows you to have a multi-stakeholder approach. When something, for example, is affecting your entire sector or has the potential to, you have an information sharing network about disinformation. So you can help each other pre-bunk and prepare for information shaping events across your sector. The other thing for me that's really important is empowering people, empowering anybody within your organization to say no, whoever is asking the question. One of the great examples for me is that business email compromise type attack. You might believe that you're speaking to somebody extremely senior in the organization, and the human nature is you're going to do your best to help because you want to help. So you're not going to say no, and also for fear of consequences, you might not say no if someone's asking you to go somewhere outside procedure. Everyone in your organization needs to know that saying no is not an offense, and actually it's something which is to be rewarded as long as you're staying within procedure. And anyone asking you to go out needs to know they shouldn't be doing that. So it's about empowering people and making them feel comfortable with saying no when it's appropriate. We need to have a post-trust appreciation of truth, because we already live in this post-truth society. The notion of a post-truth society dates back several years now. What we don't have is a post-trust appreciation of truth. We can't just believe that something is true because it looks credible, because everything will look credible from now on. Everything will look credible from now on. It's actually quite a huge consideration, which allowed me to paraphrase Michael Jackson. Be careful what you do when a lie becomes the truth, said Michael Jackson. And of course, the other side of that is also true. Be careful when they try to make the truth become a lie. It's equally, if not more powerful. It's our greatest struggle for the next decade, and it's something which we can work together to safeguard. Thank you very much.
You can sit. Good. Thank you, Rik. Fascinating talk. We have gone a little bit over, but sorry, that's okay. And we have a few questions, so I'm just going to take these questions, and apologies if anybody had a question from the floor. So we have the Slido questions. The zero-day vulnerabilities are caused by bugs by large vendors. This drives volume to the cloud, which benefits some vendors. Should we be paranoid about this?
No. In short answer is no. So most of my career has been working for vendors. I found it was a great place to be because you have the luxury of being forward-looking instead of being firefighting, which firefighting has its own fun, but burnout rates are high, right? None of us want vulnerabilities. None of us want 0 days in particular because it drives customers away. There's no... When I used to work for McAfee, or after that Trend Micro, I tell people who I worked for, they'd be, you're the guys that write all the viruses, because it keeps you in business, right? That was a standard thing. You're the guys that write all the viruses. That isn't the case, never has been the case. Zero-day vulnerabilities are definitely caused by bugs. They're not always, and in fact, in the probably one of the largest cases to date, caused by bugs in software that was written by the large vendors, though. One of the places that you'll find a lot is in open source, Log4j being a fantastic example of that. Log4j is just an open source component that a lot of vendors integrate into their platform. And when the zero-day in Log4j was there, believe me, in vendor land, we were scrambling as much as you were, because all of you were asking us, which one of your products has this vulnerability? And we're like, I don't know. And you have to dig through all the code and all the product management documentation and details to find out where this stuff is. We are just as affected by 0 days. In fact, we have a magnification factor because we have multiple customers that rely on us, as you are. It's definitely not something that we enjoy or benefit from in any way.
So I'm actually just going to take one more of these. Should we slow down OT migration due to the cyber risk currently in the world?
I think that horse has bolted. I think OT migration was hugely accelerated by the pandemic. It was moving rapidly anyway, but when the pandemic hit and lockdown specifically hit, you weren't allowed to go somewhere to interact with hardware, so remote solutions had to be found and deployed. Once those things are deployed, we don't walk them back. What you need to do is make an architectural analysis. Do you have a defensible environment in the first place? If you don't, fix that first. Other stuff will remain a risk, but as long as you don't have a defensible environment, new risks will keep piling up. So look at your environment, look at things, basic things like network segmentation, and make sure that you're doing that properly, and then begin to deploy visibility solutions once you've got good segmentation, so you can identify everything that's on those OT networks. Know normal, detect bad. Understand what's normal within your environment, look for things that fall outside of that normal range. But build a defensible environment, get visibility. They're your first two things. You're not going to slow down the rise of OT access.
Thank you very much, Rik.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
There you go, how time flies. Rik, that was excellent and truly disturbing at the same time. And as you were talking there, I was watching your hands to see where they actually, is it really Rik Ferguson? I know I'm racing against a train, but I really enjoyed this conference. I hope you did too. Really excellent talks, some quite scary ones, as we've seen. But what I really picked up on some of the was tech for good, particularly Professor Patricia Maguire's talk this morning on preeclampsia research, but also the aorta research and the imaging that the University of Galway are doing. I'm going to go straight to the thank yous. So I'm going to thank the Minister Norma Foley, and the Minister's Office for organising her attendance yesterday. Thank our sponsors and our exhibitors. We can't do this without your sponsorship. Thank the hotel. I think they did a stunning job, both logistics and catering. I'm going to have to lose some weight very quickly. Thank conference partners and Fastlane, and also HEAnet on the tech front. Thank our programme committee. And thank to all our speakers, workshop facilitators, chairs. Big shout out to our tech crew, the coolest people in the room, Lisa Deary and Paul McDonnell. Beautiful, seamless work. Thank the HEAnet conference team, led by John Craven, with Niamh King, Sharon Moylan, Niamh Dawson. But a particularly big thank you to Aoife Mansur on a highly successful first HEAnet conference rodeo. Top job, absolutely top job. Thanks to the HEA crew back at base or in their homes or wherever they be for keeping our packets running while we're here networking. And of course, a big thank you to you in the room and those joining remotely. For those in the room, you can grab a takeaway lunch at reception sponsored by Anthology. Thank you, Anthology. Do we have a save the date for next year? In any event, there we go. We are back here next year, and I hope to see you back here next year. Slán Abhaile. Safe home. Thank you.